You're listening to Wycombe Sound, online, on Radio Player, and on 106.6 FM.
It's 2 minutes past 6. You are listening to a special election programme here on Wycombe Sound with myself, Bob Johnson. We have assembled all of the candidates standing in the Wycombe constituency, and we will be asking them some of the questions from the huge number that you've sent in to us. How this programme will work is that, first of all, I'm going to ask each candidate to introduce themselves and then allow them 3 minutes to make an opening speech. After we've heard from everyone, I will put the questions that we've received from you to them to debate the issues that matter to you. And at the end of the debate, we will allow each candidate to make a 1 minute closing speech. We will time everyone, and we will give you a warning when your time is nearly up. To make it totally fair, we put the candidate's name, I would call it a hat, but actually it was a Tupperware tub, and have drawn them out to decide which order they will make their speeches. And Ed Gemmell came out first. So Ed, I will invite you to introduce yourself and give your opening 3 minute speech.
Thank you very much. So I'm Ed Gemmell. I'm an independent candidate, and I have one policy, and that is reversing climate change. I'm a local resident living in Hazelmere. I'm a single father with 2 sons, active in the local community, whether in the Wycombe Museum, in the local rugby club and hockey club, or in talks that I do regularly in a lot of schools. I am standing only on the biggest issue to affect us all in our lifetime and globally, and that is climate change and global warming. We all know that the United Nations had recently, or last year, had given us a warning that we had to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and they'd given us less than 11 years to do it. Within the last 2 days, the United Nations has issued another report saying we are on track for 3 to 4 degrees by the turn of the century. And that has now become our norm and where we're going. They have told us bluntly that we need to reduce the carbon emissions we're pumping into the atmosphere globally by 6% a year for the next 10 years. It's a big, steep hill, and we're very, very far off. We've been increasing emissions globally by 1.5% now for the past 10 years, and it's projected to go up. We've also had warnings from scientists. 21,000 scientists signed the warning that was issued in October 2017, telling us we'd launched the next extinction event. 11,000 signed the climate emergency warning of scientists on the 5th of November, at the same time as Donald Trump tried to pull America out of the Paris Accord. Now, this issue is so vast that we've had President Macron, Greta Thunberg, Caroline Lucas from the Green Party and others say that our house is on fire. Well, that's right, but they didn't tell us all the story. The house is on fire. We've gone next door to try and wake up our family. Once we've woken them up, we've staggered towards the steps and we've gone down the stairs towards the front door of our house that's aflame. And we've got to the front door and found it shut. So we've gone into the living room. And having gone into the living room, we found the windows shut. And then we've turned around and faced the fire. And with very little time or anything else to do, we have no choice but to put it out. We throw plant pots on it, we pour water on it, we do everything we can. And if we're lucky, we get to the point that no one is injured and we put out the fire.
For 20
now,
seconds.
That is the position that we're in today in the world. The UN has bluntly told us we must act now. None of our politicians are properly handling this. They are all distracted by other issues. In terms of Brexit and Remain, it won't matter which side of the bus you're on when the bus goes off the cliff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next name to come out of the hat was Julia.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Julia Wassell, and I am a quite well-known, I think, district and county councillor. I've been representing various wards in East Wycombe since 1997, and I decided to stand, and I was selected by my party, which is the Wycombe Independents. I'm very pleased to say that myself and Toni Brodelle are making history in this election. It's the first time in Wycombe there have been 2 women on the ticket, and there's very rarely been any women at all standing. So it is important to get a good gender balance in our politics, and I'd like to go on to say that I am concerned about the state of politics both locally and in the UK. I believe that we're in a democratic crisis. that our political institutions need urgent change. I think the referendum showed that up, and the abandoning of the Standards Board of England by the coalition government, in my view, was a great mistake. So I'd like to clean up politics. I'd like a cleaner, greener High Wycombe. And I do share some of Ed's views. Some of the benefits of being an independent candidate is that you can draw on the strengths and learn from the other candidates. So I would get a great big broom and I would clean up High Wycombe. Fly tipping and so on would become extinct. We would have no more of that, and I would support local councils in redesigning the town centre. I think my number one concern has been for a very long time NHS and social services. As we know, there's an integration agenda where the NHS and social services are coming together. And it's very important that residents understand what is going on in the NHS, and I would be the best person, I believe, to promote this, having worked in the NHS for about 15 years. Another issue that I'm very concerned about is having health services that are local, accessible and comprehensive, so that people can go locally as far as possible to a health service. But I don't believe that the Labour government Centres of Excellence policy of having A&E in Stoke Mandeville for us is going to be reversed. And the reason for that is that 96 accidents and emergencies have closed. But I'm concerned about the impact on the paramedics and the outcomes in people's healthcare.
20 seconds.
An area that's often overlooked is children and young people. They don't have a voice in this election, but I would make sure that I was a very strong voice for those that don't have one, particularly children and young people.
Thank you, Julia. The next name out of the hat was Vijay.
Well, hello, Wycombe. I'm Vijay Srao, the UKIP candidate for the Wycombe constituency. This general election is very important for the future of our great country. The government says that this is the Brexit general election, which will decide the issue for good. But we have already voted to leave in the 2016 referendum. Why haven't we left as yet? It's been 3.5 years of indecision. Wycombe voted for a clean break Brexit at the European elections in May 2019. So why have our votes been ignored? Where's the deal we voted for? We've been sold out by Steve Baker and the Conservatives. I mean, you can't trust the Tories with Brexit. It's time for a change. Vote for Vijay Singh Srao, vote for UKIP on Thursday, December the 12th. And a little bit about myself. Now, I was born in... So my parents, my father came to Wycombe in 1956. He's Punjabi. My mother came to Wycombe in 1962. She's from Finland, so I have both a non-EU and EU parent. And I went to local schools at Hamilton, Belfield, which is now the Disraeli School, and the John Hampden Grammar School. I serve on the Downey Parish Council, and I'm concerned about what's the decline in the town centre for the last 40 years. You can see what a lack of democracy has done. Wycombe should have a town council so that we can take care of our affairs locally rather than it dictated to by people in Aylesbury. Now, as a farmer, I support the Countryside Alliance's Rural Charter. We have to make Brexit work for the countryside by supporting our farmers and producers. And we have to recognise the importance of wildlife management and the value of hunting, shooting and fishing. We need to connect the countryside by delivering first-class rural broadband. There are some countries in the developing world that have leapfrogged the UK as far as broadband goes and fibre. Now, we also should scrap the BBC licence fee.
20 seconds.
It's a TV tax, and it should move to subscription only. We should also stop HS2. People thinking it's going to affect only those people around Aylesbury, but for 7 years, 24 hours a day, trucks will be going through Wycombe district onto the M40 and making life miserable for everyone in the area.
Thank you very much. 3 minutes exactly. OK, the next name out of the hat was Khalil.
Hello, my name's Khalil Ahmed. I'm a district councillor and I'm also the parliamentary candidate for the Labour Party here in Wycombe. I've been a councillor since 2011 representing the Disraeli ward, which is one of the deprived wards in High Wycombe. I've seen, since I've been a councillor, these local councils being decimated by the austerity measures applied by the central government, firstly by the coalition of 2010 to 15, and then further exacerbated by the Tory government since then, which has seen grants cut, and as a result we've had public services cut, and people here are suffering. The gross the injustice that is being applied on people around Wycombe was just far too much for me, that I needed to stand up and make a stand for it. We've seen rising waiting times, operations, GP appointments. I don't necessarily need to quote these. I think everybody knows that this is actually happening. Only in the last few days it was reported that 10 hours it took for a 999 ambulance to come out. This is the severity of what's actually happening. People here have been driven to use food banks, right, which is increasing, but yet there isn't any representation at Parliament to see that this is actually happening. We've got rising class sizes. Homeless is up. Wycombe Homeless Connection is saying that their demand is getting stronger and stronger. That means that there is something going on. Wycombe deserves better. Wycombe needs to get its pride back to what it was. And I think that starts off with actually having local democracy first, for which I have campaigned for a town council, and I can endeavour to do that in itself. I've seen lots of things that have been blocked, which I've been trying to bring about change for Wycombe, such as getting the market back into council-controlled ownership, a charter market town which has been completely wiped out by the Tories by giving it out to a third party out of town. I just think that is just unbelievable. For my pledges as a parliamentary candidate, although it's been said that the A&E can't return, I'm not defending Labour's decision for privatising and services of excellence that they took back. Obviously, things can go wrong, and I believe that I can campaign, and I will try and endeavour to get that A&E back to this town if that's anything I achieve during my 5 years, if I'm elected. Together with that, my other pledges also include a fully inclusive education system, a reversal of budget cuts that have been applied, try and get more social houses. Again, we've seen Red Kite completely take this social housing system to complete brink of no hope, because we've got over 1,300 people on the homeless register waiting for houses. They've sold off council houses, not replenished that stock. Wycombe District Council have failed to govern over that. That's amongst many other things. And lastly but not least, WASPI women have been served gross injustice. There's 4,000 women that have been affected as a result.
Thank you, Khalil.
For them.
The next name out of the hat was Steve Baker. Steve.
Thank you very much. I'm Steve Baker. I'm the Conservative candidate for Wycombe, and I'd like to thank everybody for having given me the opportunity to be the MP for the last 9 years. We've helped hundreds of people every year. You know, I've put 2 caseworkers into Wycombe, and I'm very grateful that we've had the opportunity to help so many local people with problems in their lives. The reason for this general election is that Parliament ceased functioning. Our system relies on a Prime Minister being able to command a majority in the House of Commons. And I remember at the count in 2017, I said something which turned out to be wrong. I forecast that by the autumn of 17 we'd be back for another general election. But we've staggered on with a hung Parliament for those 2 years, and eventually we've reached the point where Parliament has collapsed. It would have collapsed sooner if it hadn't been for the Fixed Term Parliament Act. So we've gone to the country. We're asking the public across the UK to give us a Conservative majority so that we can vote through a deal to exit the European Union into a really outstanding, broad and deep relationship based on friendship and free trade. And I'm proud of what I've done to not only get that deal, but to get my Conservative colleagues to vote for it. And I acknowledge plenty of people in Wycombe voted Remain. Plenty also, of course, voted Leave. But what I've done, and the reason I've had a higher profile than perhaps many people have found comfortable, is what I've done is I've led my colleagues to support a deal so that we can leave smoothly with a transition into a great future relationship. Because what we need to do is move this country onto the next stage of our national life. You know, one of the things about this general election is the environmentalists have really won the argument. We're all environmentalists now. And it's not just the environment we need to focus on. You know, we're hiring 183 more police officers into Thames Valley by the end of 2020-21. We're putting primary school funding up from the minimum of £3,500 per pupil to £4,351 per pupil in Wycombe, and on secondary schools from £4,800 to £5,254. On the NHS in cash terms, we're putting an extra £33.9 billion each year into the NHS. Perhaps we'll come back to the extra demand on the NHS. Just this morning I had the Secretary of State here in Wycombe to discuss what we need going forward, including on urgent emergency care and future investment. So I think we have a really fantastic programme with which to go forward in this country if we have a Conservative majority government. But this is fundamentally the choice at this election. Do we go forward with Boris Johnson leaving the European Union and respecting the referendum result with this deal which does deliver a great relationship and then move on to normal priorities? Or are we going to have Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister, renegotiating a Brexit in name-only deal and offering that to the public alongside Remain in yet another referendum, with a further referendum on the Union, with all the chaos and delay and stagnation that would mean? I would really urge people to vote Conservative in Wycombe and across the country so we can move on to the next phase of our national life.
Thank you very much. The final name out of the hat was Peter Simms.
Hello, so I'm Peter Simms. I'm the Green Party candidate for High Wycombe in the general election. And I think one of the things that the last few years has really proved is that our democracy is not fit for the challenges it faces. As other people have mentioned, that Parliament spent the last 3 years just arguing over this one issue that has become all-encompassing. And it's got to the point where we really need to move on from this. And I've heard on the doorstep people who had both sides' views on our relationship with the European Union saying, but accepting that we have to start moving towards a compromise and a democratic way forwards on this. So our democracy is not fit for the challenges it faces. So what sort of democracy would be? Well, I think the Green Party is very clear that proportional representation has got to be part of that, and we've got to move away from this two parties fighting for who's going to be in absolute control, because we have to recognise that actually a lot of the challenges we're facing are not party political issues. It was highlighted just a moment ago that supposedly there's consensus on this, so perhaps we need to move towards a more collaborative and less divisive style of politics. The UK is also one of the most centralised countries in Europe. If we want to free up local councils at the local level to, whether that's deliver the climate emergency or provide better education or provide better healthcare services, then we need to give them the powers to do that, and we need to give them the funding to do that. So I think that the Green Party is very much of the view we need a completely different approach. We need to stop approaching this the issue of our relationship with the European Union by going, how can we split people into two groups? How can we get a majority to force one particular view through? Because it doesn't matter which way we go, if we force one view through, we will alienate the people who had very strongly held views on the other side. And we have to recognise that people have very complex views on this issue, and they have very complex preferences. It's not there's two options, there's at least 3 or 4 options, and we have to start building a consensus. And whether that's another referendum or whether that's but with ranked choices so people can express their complex preferences, or whether that's a citizens' assembly has been worked very effectively in Ireland to resolve issues like this, we need to decide on a democratic way forwards, implement that, and then move on and tackle some of the big issues that are coming up. And I'll just say one quick thing about climate change. You can listen to my individual thing about that if you want. But if the UK is going to make its fair contribution, if it's going to take international solidarity seriously, and it's going to take an equitable approach, it's a 9% annual reduction for 10 years that it's got to achieve. Which parties here do you think actually have a viable plan to achieve that?
That is your 3 minutes. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you to all of you for your opening addresses. Now, the eagle-eared among you will realise that actually we've only heard from 6 of the candidates. I'm afraid to say that Toni Brodelle, the Liberal Democrat candidate, is unwell today on the day that we were recording this, which is Thursday the 28th of November, and so that is why she is not present. We wish her all the very best. I will now move on to the questions that we have from our listeners, and as one of the points made was regarding the NHS, I'm going to ask this one first. Kathy, who wanted to know, do you support bringing back A&E services to Wycombe Hospital? Steve, I'm going to hand that one over to you first.
I'd absolutely love to have a full-service emergency department in Wycombe Hospital. But I've this morning had a meeting with the Secretary of State at the hospital, and he's confirmed what I knew to be true, that the approach I've set out to the public based on an urgent treatment centre is the right and practical one. Now, when I was first elected, I think if I recall correctly, I forget the exact words and I haven't dug out the leaflet, I promised to leave no stone unturned. So among the people in seeing whether or not we could get A&E back, amongst the people I discussed this with in detail, Sir Bruce Keogh, the Clinical Director of the NHS, Clifford Mann, the President of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. There's a YouTube video on my website with Jonathan Benger, the head of the clinical head for urgent and emergency care in the NHS at the time, of course the Secretary of State and local managers. And having confirmed it this morning, I can say to any of the candidates, if they go and discuss this issue with the NHS, they'll find that the right way forward for our town is the urgent treatment centre that we have, together with the really world-class heart and stroke units that we have. The biggest killers are heart attack, stroke and cancer. All three are treated at Wycombe. We also, of course, need walk-in services, and they're in the urgent treatment centre. There's an article on my website which sets out all the conditions which can be treated in the treatment centre. If I thought we could get an emergency medical centre here, a full A&E, well, of course, I'd work for one. But as I say, I'm absolutely certain, because I checked only this morning, that it is not possible to bring back an A&E to Wycombe without closing it at Stoke Mandeville, because centralisation to drive up outcomes has meant that you need a population of about 500,000, and that means Buckinghamshire can have one A&E, and it's at Stoke Mandeville. Now, people in Aylesbury have started to realise that stroke and heart care is here in Wycombe. Well, I actually think we're better off with an urgent treatment centre, a heart unit and a stroke unit here. What we need, instead of talking about going back to the past, remembering we're 5 times more likely to live today if we have a heart attack thanks to this quality of care. Rather than harping back to the past, what we need to do is go forward to the future, and perhaps in another answer I'll explain about the exciting future that's before us in Buckinghamshire, which I was learning about this morning.
Vijay, Srao.
Okay, well, I think that with the UK's population is, I think, projected to increase by about 15 million in the next sort of 15 years. And we're going to need a lot more services to deal with the problem. So the government's taken a very short-term view. They're just trying to firefight the current situation. They're not thinking about the development which is going to happen around Oxford, in Berkshire, West London, or in Aylesbury. We will need more schools, more hospitals, and why shouldn't we have the best multi-speciality hospital in the UK right here in Wycombe? There's plenty of land just outside the town. We need somebody who's going to champion Wycombe, not just spout the party line. So we have to think about the future and invest ahead of time, because this is what happened with the Labour Party. They opened the doors to unlimited EU immigration, but they didn't plan to provide any services. So it's 1 month for a GP's appointment, people can't get the school places, and the roads are damaged. So you have to plan ahead of time, and that's what the government isn't doing.
Khalil Ahmed.
Thank you. I strongly support the return of the A&E, as that is my number one pledge on my leaflet, as you can see. I strongly and wholeheartedly disagree with what has been said.
Just to clarify, we can't see. I haven't got your leaflet in front of me.
So sorry, I apologise if you don't have, but for the benefit of people, those that have seen it and will see it in due course, my number one pledge on there is to campaign for the return of the A&E Maternity and Paediatrics Department here at High Wycombe. I strongly disagree with the assertion by Steve Baker saying that it's not possible. I do recall Steve making this comment before at previous hustings in 2015, saying that whoever tells you this is lying to you and doesn't have an ambition. So the so-called Durrow report that was commissioned, allegedly surrounded by controversy in terms of the author of that person, of the, Durrow himself, one of the authors, and who funded that report in itself. I strongly disagree with that. I think that there is a case we can actually bring it back. The Centre of Excellence is proposed by Labour back in 2003. Again, New Labour was a different breed of Labour government to what it is today. I believe that we are completely in favour of local people, and I think that decision was perhaps not the best one that the Labour government could have made. And just because the Centre of Excellence was established doesn't mean to say it works well for the people. I've witnessed flaws with this Centre of Excellence, although it has been said by the previous speakers that we have a Centre of Excellence for heart. There isn't any walk-in facilities. I happened to come across a patient here who had to wait nearly an hour for an ambulance. The relatives had said that they will drive him in, and they said, no, you can't, you have to wait for an ambulance. That could have been the time in terms of that person surviving or dying in that sense. So I think that there is a lot of flaws in itself. And I do take issue with the fact that today Matt Hancock decided to come down to Wycombe. Perhaps it's an election campaign and it was appropriate, more of a political publicity stunt on terms of the state of the building. But today it has been said by Steve Baker that he checked again today. So that means in the last 9 years, perhaps the desire to return the A&E was never there, because it was quite content that we're happy with the way services are. So I'll end it on that I will actively campaign for the return of the A&E.
OK, because you have referenced other people in the room, I am going to allow them the chance to respond. So, Steve.
The kindest thing I can say about what Khalil said to the public is that it's just not well informed. It's just not well informed. I've been to the highest authorities in the NHS to discuss this, and it is either incompetent or mendacious to suggest that A&E can come back in. It's certainly not in its old form. You wouldn't want it back in its old form. You'd be more likely to die. And we can't go forward for the reasons that I've given to a full emergency centre here. And it's just simply wrong to tell the public that you can have a new style A&E in Wycombe. It's going to be in Stoke Mandeville, and we're going to have an urgent treatment centre here. And I have checked it with the highest authorities. I never make political capital out of the fact that it was closed, A&E was closed under a Labour government. And the reason that I don't is because it was a clinical decision. Now, I'm first and foremost concerned with what is best for the people of Wycombe. And what's best for the people of Wycombe is to take the best clinical advice on this, and that's what I'm doing. So, Khalil just said there's no walk-in. Only this morning I was there, and there was a lady hobbling her way in with some foot injury, and I went and fetched her a wheelchair, as it happened, and had a lovely chat with her. But there's a lady with a foot injury walking in, being assisted in, to our urgent treatment centre for treatment this morning. What there isn't is the capacity to bowl up with a heart attack, but you wouldn't want that anyway. And let's not mislead people, because it's dangerous. If someone thinks they're having a heart attack, they should dial 999. If somebody is not having life-threatening conditions, then they should dial 111 and ask for the best advice. But they can go to the urgent treatment centre if they wish. But I would say to people, I am being absolutely honest on this subject, and I hope you listeners won't mind me saying it takes some courage. But I am trying to maintain my integrity and do what is right for the public in Wycombe, and that's to have an urgent treatment centre, heart and stroke, and to fight for the investment necessary to modernise everything we do and integrate it. But again, perhaps we'll come back to that later.
Peter Sims.
So I won't go into the full detail of this, because I'd explain this more in my individual interview, so I'd encourage you to listen to this. But if you look at the NHS in the way it's run at the moment, it's almost entirely focused on cure. Someone gets an illness, someone gets a disease, we'll try and fix them. I mean, that's not wrong. We need a public health service to do that. But the reason it is costing us, the reason the price keeps going up and there is all this pressure on services is because we take that approach. Piling more money in alone is not going to solve the problem. We've got to change the approach, and that means focusing on prevention rather than on cure. So I won't say any more about that. I'll leave people to listen to my individual thing if they want to listen to me expand on that. I will just say one point in response to what Steve's just said. He's basically saying, trust me, I've spoken to these people, I'm being honest. Okay, well, fair enough. But for the candidate for a party whose leader, should we say, is not always have a history of being honest, maybe some people might find that hard to do.
My interview with Jonathan Benger is available on my YouTube channel and people can watch it for themselves.
Julia.
Thank you very much. I think one of the reasons that I'm a really strong candidate in this election is that I've been campaigning for better health services in High Wycombe for over 30 years. I think I'm best known as a mental health campaigner, and I even set up a charity because I felt there was a lack of mental health services in High Wycombe. And at the time at which the Accident and Emergency Department and Children's Services and Maternity and Special Care Baby Unit was being closed, and Steve is right to say this was on the Labour government under advice from medical associations. It was being moved to Stoke Mandeville. I put heart and soul into keeping it here. I was on every protest. I collected signatures. I put my own money up to get a legal aid opinion on whether we could take a judicial review. And I fought and fought and fought at the county council, and not one local councillor from any party would support me in referring the decision to the Secretary of State for Health. In the end, one of the Conservatives, bless her, felt so sorry for me, she did second my motion, but it fell. Now, I believe there have been some good points made about prevention, and I believe, Steve, that we cannot get the critical mass of proper staffing into High Wycombe to run an A&E. That is the problem. I can sit here and say, yes, I can get the A&E department ready. I can get it ready quite quickly, but I could not get the critical mass of excellent staffing in there. That is why we can't do it. But what I would be able to do is make incremental improvements. I do believe we need a better and more available X-ray facility, for example, because it's wrong for somebody to have had something found on a scan at Wycombe Hospital, potentially serious, like a brain tumour, and then they have to make their own way over to Stoke Mandeville in a terrible state to have a superior scan. I think that is wrong. And I also think the promises that were made about better transport to Stoke Mandeville, they have never been met. But I don't think anyone here could say, without considering the other 95 A&Es that have closed, that Wycombe on its own could have a local A&E department. I would love to have it. If I had to walk to John O'Groats or Land's End to get it, I would do it. But it just can't be done because there isn't the critical mass of excellent staffing to go in it.
Ed Gemmell.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for your question. And I would totally support bringing back A&E to Wycombe. And if I was elected as the MP, I'd do what I could to try and facilitate that. I'd also love to get more support for GP surgeries. I think they're totally overworked here, and anything we can do to take off some pressure from them would be fantastic. My own experience of the NHS here has been great. I had a chronic slipped disc in my back with very, very severe sciatic pains. And the ambulance services and the walk-in in Wycombe and all of the other services I had were absolutely fantastic, and I applaud our NHS in the area. We do, as I'm campaigning especially to bring everybody's attention to climate change, we must focus on planning for the NHS that isn't just looking at 6 months, a year, or even 5 years ahead. If we do not put right the global warming at the moment, the projections from the scientists and backed up by various others in other organisations suggest we could have 250 million to 1.3 billion people on the move within 20 to 30 years. That could put Britain under pressure of getting up to 500,000 or 1 million a month of refugees with nothing in their hands, potentially 20 to 30 years from now. So as well as looking at our local situation and trying to bring A&E in here and backing up people like Julia, who do a lot of the work to try and improve these services, we've got to plan forward to what may be happening if we don't put climate change right. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you very much, Ed. You are listening to an election special here on Wycombe Sound. I have 6 of the 7 candidates who are standing in the Wycombe constituency looking for your vote on the 12th of December. I shall continue to ask the questions that we have had sent in to us. And this one comes from Sarah, who says, how do you think we can stop the current problem of the lack of provision for children with special educational needs? And what can be done to enable such children with those needs to reach their full potential? Peter, I'm going to give that one to you first of all.
So I think part of it is funding. I think over the last decade there's been a lot of cuts to educational funding, which have clearly done a lot of damage to the local services. So I think there needs to be more funding and to ensure that we have consistent, well-funded education services. I also think that they should be provided through the local council, through local democracy. I don't think, in the same way as the NHS, I don't think we need any private provision of any education things, and that includes transport for schools and things like that as well. I think funding is the key thing in education that's holding us back on this one.
Okay, Khalil.
My second pledge, actually, again, I apologise, you don't have the leaflet. The second pledge is actually for fully inclusive education, which doesn't discriminate against any children of any ability or background. And this falls within that category in itself, right? SEN children is definitely something that are currently suffering as a result of lack of resources. And the lack of resources is coming directly from a lack of funding. We've already seen nearly £35 million from schools within Buckinghamshire cut since 2015. And that seems to not be reversed at the moment, and that's what we aim to do. With the Labour government, we intend to reverse this by setting up a national education service which caters for all, including SEN children in itself. Here in Wycombe, I know of many schools that I've actually visited. I wrote out to all of them. I visited at least 5 or 6 of them, and all of them told me that they are struggling with only one SEN resource, right, which they sometimes have to share among schools, and that was the only thing. So I think as a result, children are suffering, and that's something I would very much support. But it's a Labour government that would obviously invest heavily into that, and by setting up a national education service which will be inclusive of all children of all backgrounds and abilities.
Julia.
Thank you. Well, my number one pledge in my manifesto is a brighter future for children and young people. And in that, I've mentioned the terrible time that children with SEN and their carers have been experiencing. Buckinghamshire County Council Children's Services have been inadequate for a number of years now, and that is a shocking indictment of the investment that has not been forthcoming to make our children and young people's services outstanding. And if you elect me, I will make those services outstanding without question. Now, what's happening with SEN children and their carers is that they are not getting proper educational provision. And some of these parents are having to take Bucks County Council to court to get the right school for their children. And I have about 3 or 4 families I'm trying to help at the moment, and that is a disgraceful situation that they are forced to take legal action against their own council when they've already paid council tax to get the service. So I want to see easier access to the education plan or statement, as it used to be called, that these children need. I want to see more educational psychologist input to support the children. I want to see more available specialist school places so that every single one of our Wycombe children have the school that they need. And finally, let's put a stop to this ridiculous legal action that has to be taken by parents, and let's make sure all our children's services are properly funded, youth clubs, outreach, sports facilities. If I single-handedly can start a tennis academy for children in an area of deprivation, think what I would be able to do if I was MP for High Wycombe.
Ed Gemmell.
Thank you for the question, Sarah. I think that the answers that came from Khalil and Julia were fantastic, and they're both very experienced in this area as local councillors. I definitely agree that this is an area where we should be looking to get more funding, and I definitely agree that children with any sort of difficulty should be looked after in the best way we can. I certainly would like to think that with the difficulties that we are all going to be facing in the future, that we would be looking after our children today, tomorrow, and in the next 20 and 30 years. So I agree with the other candidates. And if I was the MP in Parliament for Wycombe, then I would be using whatever authority I can to try and get better provision for those children with special needs. Thank you.
Vijay.
Well, I agree with Julia and Khalil on what needs to happen locally, but we should also, people who are genuinely in need and who can't afford to pay for the services themselves, we should help them. But unfortunately, some people do get an assessment for their child so that they can game the system and get into the school which they want to get into, and then they have longer time in examinations and they try and arrange their school transport as well. So for people in genuine need, we have to support them fully, because that's what having a well-functioning society is all about. You help those who are in trouble. So I'm all for helping people with special educational needs.
Steve Baker.
Well, thanks very much. In 9 years, I've seen how tough it is for parents when their children need extra help and they are wrestling with the system. And it's one of those things that's always been very much on my mind. So I'm very pleased that as part of 14 billion extra we're putting into schools now, there will be £780 million of new funding next year for special educational needs, and we are committed to creating more school places for children with complex special needs. So I'm very much looking forward to taking that forwards.
Okay, question from Philippa. What will you do to tackle gang culture, particularly in the low-income areas and state schools? I'll put this first to Julia.
Thank you very much. Well, I think the first thing to think about is the context within which gang culture occurs, because where politicians and adults are not good role models, then young people have nothing to look up to, nothing to respect. I have worked quite closely with Wycombe Youth Action about gang culture, and I feel that it is important for young people to have peer support, but getting into gangs, intimidating people, carrying knives and getting involved in drug culture and crime is not the way forward. And I'm particularly concerned about county lines whereby vulnerable young people are sent into other areas to do this drug dealing. So what I feel that we need is a fundamental review of our youth services and children's social services from earliest age. In the early years provision in the children's centres, we need to make sure that each child is seen as a unique individual, nurture their mind, support them and help them on the right path through strong role models to not feel they need to depend on a violent and exploitative gang culture. I believe that every child has talent. Many children are gifted and talented, and some of those that go off the rails are the most gifted and talented themselves. They just haven't been channeled properly with their energy. Now, a lot of these young people that get into the gangs are vulnerable young people who are being exploited and bullied by the others. And our children's mental health issues are in crisis in this country. We have seen a doubling of the number of children aged 5 to 19 since 2004 who are having a mental disorder. And they are suffering from anxiety, depression. Many of them come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and those are some of the people that are being involved into gangs. And some of the others who are the gang leaders don't have positive role models at home. And it's up to us as adults, as politicians, to have a good role model, a good youth service, and to see the best in all our young people and let them have full rein to their talents. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve Baker.
Thank you very much. Philip asked about gang culture. There is an extended blog post on my website, stevebaker.info, about policing, but I'll just draw out a few points. So I've already said we're hiring 183 more police officers for Thames Valley by the end of 2021. We're sending a clear message to criminals. We're coming after you, meaning the law-abiding majority can live their lives free of the fear of crime. We're going to make it simpler for police to use emergency stop and search powers to take knives off our streets. So, and in particular, anyone caught with a knife will be immediately arrested, charged within 24 hours and in court within a week. We're going to increase the number of prison places by 10,000, and there are some measures on sentencing which people will find on that blog post. In particular, working to prevent people entering a life of crime. So there'll be a new statutory duty on public sector bodies to work together to address serious violence. A range of agencies are listed. A £500 million youth investment fund to support young people across the UK. That will help build 60 new youth centres across the country, refurbish around 360 existing youth facilities, and provide over 100 mobile facilities to harder reach areas. I've already made a note, should I be re-elected, to make sure that some of that funding comes our way. We've legislated to make it harder than ever before to get hold of dangerous weapons in the Offensive Weapons Act, including making it a criminal offence to possess corrosive substances in a public place, which is very relevant to Wycombe. And there's also a youth endowment fund of £200 million to provide a 10-year investment to focus on steering young people away from becoming serious offenders. You know, I've got involved with Wycombe Youth Action in the course of the last year. And if I'm re-elected, obviously I'd be delighted if they allowed me to continue as a patron, and I'll be giving them all of the support that I can.
Peter Sims.
So I think there's two very clearly different parts of the approach to this. One is the immediate response, and one is why does this happen? Why is this the problem that it is? What are the long-term drivers of gang culture? So, and I think the key thing that we have to tease out in this is inequality and social mobility. Both of those are absolutely critical indicators that have been getting worse. So over the last 30 years, we've had more inequality and have less social mobility, which means where the background people grew up in affects them more what they'll achieve in their life now than it used to 30 years ago. And both of those, in my mind, are far more importantly than GDP or growth, or in terms of indicators of whether our country's going in the right direction. And it's clearly not at the moment. So if we want to reduce the impacts of those things, yes, I mean, I'll pick up the points Julia made around early intervention, around youth services, around early years, absolutely critical. But we've also got to deal with these big long-term issues. So this means the Green Party is proposing in its manifesto a land value tax, which is effectively a wealth tax on wealth that you can't hide, to try and reduce inequality. And we need to invest in the education system, amongst other things, to try and increase social mobility, to make the amount of effort you put in and the amount of your skills, determine where you go, determine what you can achieve in your life, not where you were born or what your background was or who your parents were. Those things shouldn't matter. It should be about what you do. And that creates opportunities, which creates another path for people.
Vijay Srao.
Well, the Conservative government cutting 20,000 police officers didn't help, but it can't all be stick. I mean, it can't all be about punishment. We do have to have the police officers there on the ground, engaging with the community. A lot of police community support officers in Wycombe, their services have been cut. And the other thing is that now with education, what's happened is that now more than 50% of the people who attend our grammar schools, they're from outside the county. So those intelligent children in Wycombe who would normally have gone to those grammar schools, now they're in sort of the secondary modern. So they're maybe not challenged enough. So I think that now the government want to build grammar schools elsewhere. Can Buckinghamshire have their grammar schools back, please, so that local children who need to be challenged intellectually can get access to, to a good quality education? We've gone backwards in that way. I think that also UKIP want to return the EMA so that students 16 to 18-year-olds can have some extra funding to help them in their studies. There's a shortage of materials in schools, so that will help them so that they won't be led into that kind of life of crime.
So to be clear, you're calling for more grammar schools to be built in Buckinghamshire?
I'm calling for the system which the Labour Party and the Conservatives have run by allowing people from outside Buckinghamshire, in London, Berkshire, Hertfordshire, to send their schools, send their school children to Buckinghamshire. More than 50% of the children now admitted to the schools in Buckinghamshire are from outside the county. So if young people who would previously have gone to those grammar schools from Wycombe, they find themselves not challenged fully enough in other schools, if they had that opportunity to go to a better school, if they had the EMA grant as well with some extra, get £30 to spend, then they wouldn't have to engage in those kind of activities.
Khalil, your party was one of those mentioned. Would you like to respond?
I'd like to say my piece first, actually, and respond. Thank you. Gang culture is something that I've been very vocal about in the past, and I think people around here, around the panel, will agree that I've challenged Thames Valley Police on many occasions to see how they actually deal with gang culture, and the ward that I represent actually has a very severe problem with that. Although not very well publicised, but we used to have initiative known as GMAP, which was multifaceted approach towards dealing with gang culture. I don't know what happened to it, whether it continued, but what it comes down to is, again, lack of resources. Now, it was mentioned earlier that 183 police officers are being brought onto Thames Valley Police, but if we look at back, right, since 2010, 389 police officers have been lost by Thames Valley Police. 115 PCSOs have been lost. Just police presence itself makes a big difference. You know, you need to identify and acknowledge the causes of gang culture, what actually happens and how can you tackle it. So it's all well and good ploughing in money now and making these grand gestures, we're going to put this, when you've actually broken it in the first place. I think that's contributed towards it. The closing of the children's centres didn't help. We've announced 1,000 new children, short-term centres. Again, early intervention does help. More education towards that, more funding in youth services, something that's already been cut. I think all of this contributes towards it. I've heard lots that has been said. I agree with most of the suggestions that have been said. I'm not going to disagree. Being the last speaker always doesn't, so that you can't repeat the same point again. But as I said, we need to send a message quite clear to youth, right? Crime doesn't pay. And that can only be done early intervention, more youth funding, and making sure, right, that children have an ambition and aspiration to go for. And that will come with good education and facilities provided. I'll just end it on that.
Thank you very much, Khalil. We are running out of time, so I will make this the final question, which comes from...
Ed hasn't responded on that.
I'm very sorry, Ed has not responded.
No problem, that's fine.
See, this is why I don't do David Dimble job.
So thank you, Philippa, for the question. It's always good to start with agreeing with things. I very much agree with Julia talking about positive role models. Steve's covered the things that we need to do in terms of enforcement against gang culture. But I'd like to emphasise very much, particularly being a single father of two boys who are currently 10 and 12, going on 11 and 13, it's something that's very dear to our hearts at home and often gets discussed. Gang culture is an effort for boys particularly, but people to try to belong to a club, and the wrong sort of club that's going to get them into trouble. Stephen Biddulph, a famous writer on raising boys, has very much suggested that the main issue related to gangs is that the role of the father within the family. Both parents are clearly important, but often we see that fathers are distant and not there, and it often aligns with gang membership. And Steve Biddulph had assessed this. So what we need to do is we need to give boys strong role models, and those strong role models are available in the community all the time. They're available in the families, and we should keep fathers in touch with in any situations of divorce or separation, so that they can be role models, particularly for the boys. But they're also role models in Scouts, Boys Brigade, Sea Cadets, rugby, football clubs, all of the various clubs that we have out there, and we need to encourage participation in all of these clubs, and they serve very well to give boys particularly, but all children and teenagers the opportunity to be with each other in safe surroundings and be very respectful to each other while they're learning how to behave and interact. No one's mentioned online bullying, and I think that's also another element within this gang culture, is that people get vilified online. We are making better efforts generally in society to control online culture. Parents are starting to understand it better, but it's something that I would be very, very interested in us spending more time on looking at in Wycombe and nationally. And I think that the most important part for us here is to consistently get the right people into particularly boys' lives and role models. Now, Idris Elba, just finished with that, went on and did a very hard-hitting video about knife crime, where he swore and told the kids exactly what they should be doing. But what he was trying to do was to give them a role model, and he's a good role model. But we need to find community role models and have all of them in touch with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. OK, final question from Kyle, who is from High Wycombe. What do you plan to do to help young people with their small businesses? As he says, it doesn't seem like there is a lot of real help out there currently. Vijay, I'm going to put that one to you first.
Well, I think that well, thank you, Carl, for the question. Now, in the 2016 European Commission report on it was single market integration and competitiveness in the EU, one of the things they identified was that the single market is bad for small and medium-sized enterprises and it squashes innovation. So the best thing we could do is leave the EU, and small businesses should be able to, I think, make sure that they can follow UK law and not EU law. We need to make the climate more tax friendly. We need to cut taxes and maybe also slacken some employment rules and regulations. But from what I hear, the Conservatives, they're going to just sign up to a level playing field with the European Commission as part of the trade deal. And so I'm afraid that probably small businesses won't be able to benefit from leaving the EU because of the current government's policies. But we need more investment, more breaks, more for entrepreneurs.
Khalil Ahmed.
Yes, small businesses definitely need a boost in order to get up. I think locally there are lots of provisions already in place. Bucks Business First, help new startups. B&U recently have also started this up as well, and a lot of funding has been put into it. Many people might not know about this. This is very recent. I learnt of it myself. That's the Bucks University. Help young entrepreneurs get off trying to set up small businesses. I think business rates need to be looked at and reformed to ensure that people can actually afford premises to run their businesses. Yes, some early help wouldn't go amiss with it in itself. Nationally, we are focusing as a party as well to promote and encourage more small businesses to start up. But like I said, locally, local authorities can actually start by business rates to help them go.
Peter Sims.
So I think the first thing that's got to be said and is really clear is that small businesses play an absolutely crucial role in the transition to net zero. You know, if we're going to have a Green New Deal, we're going to have a 10-year transformation to net zero. That means localising a lot of our supply chains. That means localising food supply chains. It means a complete transformation of our economy. And because transport is one of the big emission sectors at the moment, small businesses sourcing from other small businesses and providing local services is going to be an absolutely critical part of this. And so I mentioned earlier land value tax. So the Green Party manifesto proposes replacing business rates and council tax with the land value tax. And what that does is shift the burden of the tax from the renters onto the owners, which helps small businesses, particularly startups, because they often are renting in and therefore they wouldn't have to pay business rates. So that's one of the clear, immediate financial things that we would do. But the other big thing is localisation. The Green Party is the party of localisation. We believe that power should be held at the lowest possible level. We think there should be lots of, Wales has devolution, Scotland has devolution, Northern Ireland has devolution, but England doesn't have any devolution. Westminster has all the power in England, and there is a clear need for power to be held, particularly for around transport at the intermediary level, and more powers to go to local government. And that would free up them to focus on what the needs of their area are and support local businesses.
Steve Baker.
Well, thanks very much. Well, Kyle, what I'd say is it starts by recognising the value of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial business, seeing that entrepreneurship is a creative search to help other people. And if a profit is justly earned, then it's a measure of the value you've created for other people in their own opinion. And I think if you start by valuing business and entrepreneurship as Conservatives do, then you can come up with practical policies. And they're set out in our manifesto from pages 32 through to 35. I particularly draw your attention to cutting the burden of tax on business by reducing business rates. I recently was party to an inquiry on the Treasury Committee about that. I very well understand the burden of business rates. We'll increase the employment allowance for small businesses. We'll support start-ups and small businesses via government procurement and commit to paying them on time, clamping down on late payment, expanding start-up loans, helping SMEs to become exporters, and so it goes on. Please do read the manifesto. But the reason I started as I did with this need to understand business is it has to be said that Labour's Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, really is on the hard left. In an intervention on me in the House of Commons, he confirmed the words people can look up, but he confirmed he's an unreformed Trotskyite. That's a revolutionary communist. He's said elsewhere that he wants to overthrow the market economy. He's passed Chairman Mao's little red book in public across between the dispatch boxes. It's a matter of fact. This is not somebody we want in charge of our economy and our businesses. So, Kyle, I very much hope that the Conservative Party will have a clear majority. I hope I'm re-elected as the MP, and I'd be really delighted if you got in touch so that you can share with me your experience and we can work through how best to help you.
Ed Gemmell.
Thank you, Kyle. And I think you're focusing more on the young people in small businesses rather than just on small businesses. I definitely, if I was to become an MP in Parliament, I would be concentrating on helping young people in small business. I think it's essential. I think number one is obviously access to funding, but more than that, it's about mentoring those young people, mentoring them, helping them with the right business ideas and holding their hand as they go through the first hoops in business. Locally, we have many small, medium and even successful entrepreneurs locally that would love to help young entrepreneurs, both in a mentoring sense, potentially even in a funding sense. I don't see why we shouldn't be setting up even a local crowdfunding project to start bringing in funds to set up and run an organisation like that locally. I do have to say I'm very, very disappointed when I hear any politician anywhere in the country come out and openly criticise other politicians, and I would like to see that we move towards constructive work in everything that we're doing in the future, and particularly in this area of small business advice and small business support. And I'd like to hope that if I was in Parliament, that's what I'd be doing. Thank you.
Julia Wassell.
Thank you. Well, congratulations, Kyle, on taking the initiative and your ambition to become a young business person. We've talked quite a bit today about the difficulties that young people face, and it's good to hear somebody who's hopefully got a successful business plan lined up. If I was your MP, I would make sure that you were able to network with organisations like Bucks Business First, the Local Enterprise Partnership, and the Buckinghamshire New University Incubator Project, which Khalil Ahmed has mentioned. I would want to make sure there was training available for you on how to run your small business. I don't know what sort it is, whether it's an online business, but if you needed premises, then one of my policies is to divide up some of the shops in the high street and use them as business startups. So I hope you'd be able to have one of those. Clearly, social media would be crucial to your business, and I'm sure you know more about that than I do. But if you needed any training or advice, then I hope that would be available for you. We've talked about role models for young people, and I think it would be great if once you'd got started, you would be able to go around and talk to and mentor other young people. And finally, I would love to come to the opening of your business and let people know about it. So if I'm elected, I hope you'll invite me and I'll try and boost the business for you.
Kyle. You have a couple of invitations there, so do make sure that you follow those up. Thank you to everybody who has sent in questions. Apologies if we didn't have time for your question, but had we read them all out, I think we probably would have been here until the 12th of December, which I don't think would have gone down very well with the 6 people sitting opposite me at the moment. OK, it is time now for the closing address, which really we see very much as the reason why the people of Wycombe should vote for you. I'm going to do it in the order that we started. So Ed, I will hand over to you. You have 60 seconds. And again, as with before, I will let you know when you're getting towards the end and when the 60 seconds are up.
OK, thank you very much. Very proud to be standing as an independent in this election and representing climate change and the reversal of climate change. This is the existential and biggest threat of our time. In door knocking, I found that 99% of people I talk to on the doorstep are worried about it. They're all looking for leadership and they're all looking for conclusions to what we're meant to do in the future. We have to move now on this issue, and it is very, very worrying when we spend almost an hour on radio and we spend 59 minutes of it not talking about the climate when it's going to affect all of us rapidly and in an enormous way in the future. I would very much hope that you'll vote for me so that I can do things for Wycombe's environment, but also so on the world stage and on the UK stage, we can hold all of politicians' feet to the fire and say to them, get on with the job with the biggest issue of our times and get it done now. Time has run out.
Julia Wassell.
Well, we've had a good opportunity to air our views, and I think it's come across quite clearly that I am a very experienced and caring candidate in this election. I really want to get out there, care for the people of Wycombe, look at the issues they're facing, whether it's debt or lack of services. I want to clean up High Wycombe with a great big broom and involve a youth task force to help me to do that. I have great expertise in the area of mental health, the NHS and social services, and I have won national and local awards for this work. I have been recognised. And I would fight for better health services in Wycombe. I wouldn't be promising to bring A&E back, but I would be promising to try and incrementally improve what we had on the Wycombe site. Thank you very much for listening. Vote for me, lifelong resident Julia Wassell.
Vijay Srao.
Well, thank you, listeners, for making it to the end of this broadcast. I want to thank Wycombe Sound and all the fellow candidates for coming in and today to take part in this hustings event. It's my first ever hustings event, and I didn't expect it because it's near December. Who calls the general election in December? Whatever happens, at least Wycombe Wanderers are top of the league, and so that's something to look forward to. But yeah, so our main point is UKIP want to make Brexit happen. A vote for UKIP is always a vote for complete and total exit from the European Union, however long it takes. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, enjoy the holidays.
Khalil Ahmed.
Thank you very much. I think listeners have heard our beginning and my closing remarks will be that I am a local person that wants local change for the better. I think that Wycombe has deteriorated over the years. I think we can work to get its pride back. My main pledges indicate that A&E for me, education, homes for social housing, also injustice that has been served on the Wassell women. I want to stand up for them. I believe that is important. Improved public transport, and of course not forgetting Brexit, the terminal word. I will, as my party says, we will seek to get a second referendum based on a credible deal coming back, and then giving it back to the people in order for them to base it on that deal in itself or vote to remain.
10 seconds.
But apart from that, if you want real change, vote for Labour on December the 12th. Khalil from Wycombe for Wycombe.
Steve Baker.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Wycombe Sound. Thanks, everybody who sent in questions. I'm sorry we didn't get through more of them, and I really hope people will come to the other hustings. When I was first elected in 2010, we were clearing up an almighty financial mess, and we've had to take really tough decisions which have had serious impacts, and I know that, we all know that. But at last, thanks to the hard work of the British people in Wycombe, we're able to start spending more money and to do it responsibly. We're going to live within our means on day-to-day spending and have rules about debt and debt interest to make sure that we have responsible finances. That's enabling us to have an amazing programme. I really hope people will look at at least the bits they're interested in the manifesto. It's a fantastic programme to transform our country, to transform Wycombe, to improve things for everybody. We've had enough of Brexit. 4 years it's taken us to get a referendum, get through to having a deal. Please vote Conservative. Let's have a Conservative majority, get through Brexit, no more referendums, and get on to your priorities.
And finally, Peter Simms.
So, most of the parties around this table accept that climate change is a thing that we need to deal with. There's a lot of talk of this 2050 target, which is basically an excuse to do nothing for 20 years and start doing something in 2040. So we have to have a 2030 target, as we have to have a 10-year transition. But how matters. This is the critical bit, and the bit where I think the Green Party stands out from all the other parties. The Green Party is the only party with a credible plan of how to get to net zero that tackles inequality, ensures that it doesn't penalise the people who currently would be on the edge, living within a month of being in debt. We have to do this in a way that's inclusive, that means that we can take everyone with us and create an opportunity to have better quality of life.
10 seconds?
Vote for Peter Simms, Green Party candidate for High Wycombe.
Thank you very much. Apologies again that Toni Brodelle was unable to join us, who is the Liberal Democrat candidate. I spoke to Toni a couple of days ago. She is a teacher, and on the day I spoke to her, 16 of her 30 class were off sick. And so you can imagine that she has caught the bug that was going round. So that was why she was unable to join us on this broadcast. The people standing for election in the Wycombe constituency are Khalil Ahmed for Labour, Steve Baker for the Conservatives, Toni Brodelle for the Liberal Democrats, Ed Gemmell, who is an independent candidate, Peter Simms, who is the Green candidate, Vijay Srao, who is the UKIP candidate, and Julia Wassell, who is also an independent candidate. Many, many thanks to all of you for coming in. Julia, who stands for the Wycombe Independents, I should correct myself. Many thanks to everyone for coming in today. And just a reminder to you listening that the general election is on Thursday, the 12th of December, and the polling stations are open from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m.